So the question really is, what can we learn from the people who are used to dealing with fear day in and day out on the front line? And to help us, we've got a great superstar panel. So we've got Robbie Maddison. Robbie, you there? Hi there.
Hello, Stu.
Hey, Robbie. So that's a great Australian accent you've got there. I'm actually broadcasting live from your hometown in Australia, and you're over there in LA.
I'm very jealous.
Yeah. So we're going to be hearing from Robbie, who's an athlete, a daredevil, a visionary. He's also been a James Bond stunt double. I mean, how cool is that? And also, last but not least, a children's book author.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're going to be hearing from Robbie. First off, Janine Shepherd. So Janine is actually a member of the Order of Australia, was an Olympic-bound skier. I actually knew Janine at university. And Janine, funnily enough, I don't think she really remembers me because she was more interested in the sport jocks at uni. But she's not able to make it at the last minute. We pre-recorded this morning because she's in Wyoming, which is now about 2 a.m. and she needs to be up at 5 o'clock this morning for a film call. So we pre-recorded her stuff and it's brilliant. Simon Wagstaff, British Empire Medal decorated war veteran for meritorious military service. So Simon was a Special Forces member, a bomb disposal expert. He dropped this into the conversation. And so he knows a thing or two about fear, bomb disposal expert, parachute instructor, and now chairman CEO of the ASA group. And Chris Shambrook is with us. Good afternoon, Chris.
Good afternoon there.
Coming in to us from somewhere in southwest England. And Chris is an author, a psychologist, and psychology coach for the Team Great Britain rowing team for 5 Olympic Games in a row, which I believe is actually something of a record. So between all these great perspectives, there's going to be so much to learn, to tap into, and I fully encourage interactivity. So guys, as we go along, if you've got questions, thoughts, or whatever, just pump it into the chat bar there. And later on, we'll come to a formal Q&A. But for now, let's keep ourselves muted. Let's tune into the guys. And please do stay on till the end. We've got a couple of very interesting and nice, pleasant surprises for you. So I think we're ready to rock and roll, are we? Can I get a thumbs up if we're ready to rock and roll from everybody? Rockin'. Jeff Tan, rocking. He's always rocking in Singapore. Good. Fantastic. And Pete Williams in Hong Kong, always rocking. Good. All right, fantastic. So I would like to kick off with Robbie Maddison. So, Robbie, first of all, it's your show. Maybe you want to just spend a few minutes before I pepper you with some questions. Just give us an overview of your relationship with fear. And for those of you who may not know the name, you'll certainly know Robbie's work. So he was a stunt double for James Bond in the movie Skyfall, racing across the tops of the Turkish marketplace. And he's done all sorts of other gnarly stuff, which he's going to share with us. Over to you, Robbie.
Thanks, Chair. I was stoked to be involved in this and excited to be able to get an opportunity to talk in front of you guys. So, my job actually is dealing with fear. As you can see, this jump here is in the Corinth Canal. Probably one of the most dangerous jumps that I've done, but I've made a life out of, and my career now out of dealing with fear. I'm the current world record holder for the longest jump on a motorcycle, and I've done some stuff that deemed to be impossible. I invented a motorcycle that rides on the water and actually caught a 20-foot wave in Chopu in Tahiti on my dirt bike. Just really, some people think it's reckless what I do, but it's more me challenging myself and pushing myself to find, I guess, trying to be the best I can be and following my own passion. And I think we can all kind of attest to how important that is in life and following something that you're passionate about. So I was a motocross rider as a child. I think the biggest thing that I had going against me as a child is I didn't believe in myself. just due to the structure at home and whatever other things that were going on in my life. But I was one of the top riders under a lot of pressure, and I just didn't believe in myself 100%. And I was never dominant as a child. I had my glimpses of glory, and I was definitely one of the top dogs. But when it came down to it, under pressure, I often succumbed to the pressure and doubted myself. And then ultimately it would end in not reaching my goals. Here's a picture of me jumping off the bridge here recently in Los Angeles downtown. I jumped, it's a film called Ducked Out, but this is like doing this feat here wasn't really asked of in the film, but I wanted to do something. And it was, again, dealing with the fear, dealing with the relationship that I'll touch on in a minute about how I navigate myself through the fear. But ultimately, I got to a point in my life when I became an electrician. I turned my back on riding motorcycles. I became an electrician and was doing industrial electronics and high voltage stuff, and eventually fiber optics communications. And then I got sick, and I got a stomach full of water on a jet ski accident. I got viral meningitis, viral encephalitis. I was on my deathbed. I had stroke-like symptoms, and ultimately I was told that I wasn't going to make it. My parents sent my body over to the hospital, and obviously I made it. After that, it changed my mindset on how I looked at perceived myself. I always thought of myself a bit of an underdog. I didn't have that push to really put my foot down, but like, no, I deserve the best, and I'm going to get the best. And once I was on my deathbed and I realized how short life was, I only wanted to achieve what it gave me the motivation to go out and take what I wanted and to be confident about it and to demand it of myself and to work hard and to push and to not be satisfied unless I got what I wanted. And ultimately that led to me leaving my job as an electrician, and I bought a motorcycle, and I wanted to go after this dream reality that I had, or a dream of a reality that I wanted to be a motorcycle rider. And you know, I grew up looking at Evel Knievel, Robbie Knievel, and I was obviously moved by what they did, and it motivated me, and it made me fantasize about being, you know, a great motorcycle rider, a world-renowned motorcycle rider. And all through school, I dealt with the pressure of not being able to talk about what I did, so no one knew that I was a top motorcycle rider. I couldn't talk about it because I was worried about having our motorcycle stolen. So I developed this pressure inside myself where I wanted everyone to know that I was great at something, but I hadn't let them know. And then after I faced my death on my deathbed and was like ultimately made a recovery from viral meningitis, I went after what I really was true to me and what I wanted to happen. And I started riding motorcycles and went through leaps and bounds and was one of the first to do backflips and achieved a lot of world firsts, and I've done 7 world records now. And here's one when I jumped on and off the building in Las Vegas for, I think it was the celebration 2009 New Year's Eve. And I did 3 stunts with ESPN and Red Bull for New Year, to welcome in the new year, all of which were world records. But ultimately, I was dealing with this fear factor every time, and especially with this jump here, jumping on and off the Arc de Triomphe in Las Vegas, a 10-story building. I got the vision, asking the universe to deliver me a message. I knew there was something in there I wanted to do. I couldn't put my finger on what the stunt was going to be, and then I had an epiphany one day driving down the freeway. I drove past a Holiday Inn here on the freeway in Los Angeles, and I just realized with this speed that I was doing in the car on the freeway and the height of the building, I just realized that the right ramp with the right angles with this speed, I would be able to jump over it. So the physics, I understood the physics of it worked for me. I went about designing the ramp, and we ultimately, I went through the steps of dealing with the fear. And that was the hardest part. It was 6 months out from this event. I was already dealing with the fear. I was having night sweats. I was getting weak at the knees. Whenever I'd think about it, I'd feel sick. And, you know, what happened is, you know, psychologically, I started listening to my prefrontal cortex and I was listening to negativity that people were saying, and it was really kind of throwing me off because deep inside I knew I was worthy of it. But so I had to develop and ultimately become confident that I was worthy of it. And that happens in many different ways. I'm sure we can all attest to it and have our own experiences. But for me personally, I had to become confident that I was going to make it, and I had to let go of the thought of not making it. So I started picturing myself being successful at it and picturing myself doing the jump, and I could see it clearly in my mind. And ultimately, I learned from a shaman that I work with on asking my body questions and working with my soul and reading the negative and the positive answers from the soul and letting that to guide me through how to prepare mentally and how to prepare physically. And so I was in the best physical condition, and I've always worked at being as strong and as flexible as possible throughout my career. So through all those things put together, I was able to get to that point of being mentally confident. I worked my butt off. So, I didn't leave a stone unturned as far as what I did physically to prepare for it, as far as diet and sleep and working out, training. So once I put the hard work in, you're kind of like, you're almost there at that point. A large percentage of it is done once you put the hard work in. And mentally, I got to the point of, after facing my deathbed with the meningitis early on in my career, I wanted to go after this dream career that I'd always dreamt of. And so I got to the point of the opportunity became into my future. I came up with the idea. I did the negotiation. It was happening. And then as it got closer, I started getting very negative, sweaty palms, and then I got to the point of realizing, why am I going to blow this massive opportunity, something I've always wanted, just because I'm being too weak or too nervous to believe in myself, to just put my foot down and say, I deserve this and I'm going to take it. I'm going to do everything I can, and to not judge myself or look back or doubt myself in any way. And it was very empowering to be able to just have that mindset of, like, I meditated a lot before this jump. I shut off the negative chatter in my mind. And I got to the point of being able to sit for an hour a day with total clarity and just stillness in the mind, meditating every morning. And then I took this meditation into when I was riding, being aware of my breath, my heartbeat, the wind in my face, being aware of all the little things, becoming very awakened. And it was really a spiritual development process I went through, because I actually had to let go of a lot of the stuff that occupies your brain, that you allow it to. And essentially it was like a fight or flight mechanism. When I got onto the bike, I had some physical things I've never experienced before, where the tears were leaping out of my eyeballs, like a foot out of my eyes, that because I just knew what I was going through. It was a crazy experience I've never actually had since then or up until then in my life. But I just knew that I was turning my mind off. I wasn't allowing the chatter to happen. I wasn't addressing the negative thoughts, and I was just purely staying focused on what I envisioned in my mind. And so then that saw me successfully jump on and off the Arc de Triomphe in Las Vegas in front of 300,000 people, broadcasted around the globe. And it really lifted my level of commitment to myself and how I looked at myself. And then after that, I went and did the Arc de Triomphe jump, which you saw in these slides here. I jumped over that giant canal in Greece. It wasn't as well broadcasted, that jump, but here's a jump here I did in San Diego with the Levi Lavallee. It was another world record. But these jumps and the fear beyond them, the fear associated with them, I think can be compromised in business, or if you're trying to deliver a lecture or a speech or a job interview or whatever it is, or proposal, whatever you're dealing with. I find that the path that I've taken has led me to, and I even use it nowadays just with everything I do. It's feeling worthy, it's putting in the hard work, it's being confident, and it's being at peace with that you deserve it and expecting it of yourself. And I think that's the main thing I like to teach people. And I see it even in my children. I have 3 children now, and teaching them little steps along the way. It's once I noticed even with them doing simple things like backflipping on the trampoline, when they don't feel worthy of it, they're not able to do it. But once you take them through little protocols to build their confidence, and then once they feel worthy and they get close and they feel the taste of it, and then you see it switch in their mind and mentally. I think just as human beings, we all have that. And I definitely ran at certain opportunities for a long time and failed. But I got to the point, obviously, having this this sickness as an early teen, and facing my death, being on my deathbed, and then coming out the other side of that, and then essentially having a second chance at life. It changed the way I dealt with everything, and since then I've had a fruitful career. You know, I've actually had a lot of head injuries since then due to the meningitis that I had. I developed secondary impact syndrome, so I've actually had seizures now from traumatic impacts. I've had like 5 seizures, and 4 times I've had my heart restarted. But there are bumps in the road. But at the same time, I'm always dealing with putting my life on the line and going for something that's never been done before or a new world record. But yeah, to round it up, I think the thing that I take from all this and my message is from what I've experienced through my own practical experience is you can't achieve something until you feel worthy of it, and to feel worthy of it, you have to take that mental step to deal with the negative sides of it, feel the worthiness, prepare yourself, demand it, and then just never give in and give it everything you've got. So,
right.
I hope I made sense there, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. But it's something I'm very, very, very proud of, and also something that I love working with people on and helping them find where I can help them, you know, reflect and build strength and be able to help them achieve their greatest.
Fantastic. Good. Thank you so much, Robbie. That was, wow. I mean, I wanted to jump in so many times there and say, you know, in that bit, he's selling himself short. For example, the triumph, which you jumped on top of, just to put that into perspective, folks, that's 100-foot vertical jump that Robbie did up, and then he had to get back down off it, which I believe was harder. And when he came off that, I hope you don't mind saying, you actually pretty much nearly ripped the thumb off of your left hand on the landing there. So, you know,
yeah.
He's in very matter-of-fact sort of terms about what he's doing, but there's a hell of a lot of physical and mental commitment there. Matto, I've got a theory. You know, we're talking about fear. I think your biggest fear is actually sitting behind a desk and working from 9 to 5. Am I right?
Pretty spot on. Pretty spot on.
Yeah. So let's look at it another way. I mean, is there fear in other parts of your life? I mean, you're committed to this daredevilry on motorcycles, which is just extraordinary. I'm a motorcyclist myself, and I get excited if I catch 2 or 3 feet of air. And when I see that huge canyon jump, I mean, I honestly can't comprehend that. But do you have fear in other parts of your life? I mean, what are you afraid of, actually?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm fearless. I just have the willingness to work with my fear and to face it front on and to just take one step at a time and to work with it. And it's like with my sport of freestyle motocross and learning all these different tricks I do on the bike daily, it's always just a small step. You know, you can't just do a backflip on a motorcycle over 100 feet. It's always, you have to start somewhere. So I'm fearful of lots of things. I mean, I'm really quite a, lack of a better term, but no, I won't say the better. You know, I'm quite a sissy when it comes to live animals, snakes, spiders, stuff like that. So, you know, it's easy to look good at something you're practicing all the time, and that's essentially what I've done. Is just it's a lot of practice that's gone into it. But you know, there's fear in everything, and I always, you know, I try to do so many different things. I'm always like thinking outside the box and trying to do different things and working with things I'm not a specialist in. And I know that I always like to take on the advice of people who are smarter than me or well, you know, the better rehearsed. So with everything I do, I always try and take everyone's advice, and it's always a team effort. And so I just use that as my guide. You know, I never go into anything with false confidence. That's for sure.
Great. And can I ask you, what was the scariest moment in your career so far? The moment, pardon my language, everyone, where you were just absolutely shitting yourself.
You know what? It was sitting on the boat when I invented this motorcycle that rides on the water, and I was sitting on the boat at the back of the waves in Chopu doing this video for DC. It's called Robbie Maddison's Pipe Dream on YouTube if you haven't seen it. But I ride the motorcycle and I catch this 20-foot wave. But this wave actually, as I was going across it and I realized that I was too deep, and I was caught inside, and I knew there was no escape. It was one of the scariest moments, probably the scariest moment I've ever had, just because I knew I was stuck with this motorcycle, and there was a 20-foot wave chasing me, and I'd been practicing my breath holds, and I kind of knew that I wasn't really at the level I'd like to be at. I was holding my breath for 4 minutes, but I had to work up to that point. And from coming off the boat, I hadn't done the breathing warm-ups to get to the point of knowing that I could hold a 4-minute breath hold. So it was super, super scary. But I put myself in those scary situations quite a lot. And I mentioned it before when I was having the talk, that a mechanism I use, but asking your soul whether you're worthy of something, yes or no questions. I find that I've had great luck with getting real answers off it. You know, when I was jumping the Corinth Canal in Greece, we had wind. There's a lot of factors there. And the day I was going to jump, the writing was on the wall to me that I shouldn't jump that day. But I had to ultimately tell the gathering crowd, the promoters, everyone, that today's not the day. I'm not going to jump. And it's a hard thing to do when your ego's on the line. Everything you made plans. All these things are together. So ultimately, I had to make that call, and I found power in it by Paul Chek, who's founder of many books and the Chek Institute. But he taught me the relationship with the soul, and I asked, my soul, should I jump the motorcycle today? And I got this negative answer, you can feel the energy once you're in touch with it. But I could feel the energy being no. It was all kind of going down, and I decided not to jump that day. We had fuel issues. There was a crosswind that could have been detrimental to a positive outcome. And on the next day, obviously, I got the positive answer from my soul, and I've used that as a guide now to make those critical decisions when it's really your ego and the unknown, and it's hard to really put your finger on the point of should I do this jump or not. And that's when I jumped off the bridge there in Las Vegas. In Los Angeles. It was just before Christmas last year. We saw a slide of that sequence jumping off the bridge. But when you looked at that jump and I was looking at the ground, it looked like it was death waiting for you. There was a fine line. I could tell it was possible, but it was such a fine line to walk and to navigate to hit that landing spot in the perfect spot. I knew for sure that my wheels were going to not be able to handle the pressure I was going to put on them. But I mean, this may sound crazy, but I went back to, and I just asked my soul, I said, is it possible I can land this jump and pull it off? And I know this sounds stupid, but I think there's a mechanism inside us when we say our gut feeling and your gut instinct. And I've really used that a lot to navigate my way through my life. And it's proven to keep me safe. When I notice that there's things that aren't feeling right, this energy, there's writing on the wall, certain things happening, whether it's the winds or the weather or just whatever it is. But being able to use that helped me pull this jump off here. I said to myself, I asked my soul, can I pull this jump off and my wheel's going to be right? And I got this positive answer, and I kept doing it. And I believed in it. And I don't know whether it's, I feel that I knew, like when I looked at the jump, I was the one that looked at this jump. I found the location. I said I could do it. But when it got to the point of actually doing it, now you have to deal with everyone who's there, the video guys, the sound guys, the directors. Everyone's like, are you sure? Are you really sure? You don't have to do it. You're getting all these out clauses to do. You don't have to pull it off, but ultimately for me to perform my best and to look best and to do the best by my sponsors and for the film, you want to have this high point. And I knew that this would be the pinnacle for the film. So I really wanted to do it, but I didn't want my ego to force me to do it and to ultimately hurt myself. And I had my kids there watching too. So I'm trying to teach them fundamental lessons in life too, and not to get pressured into things that they don't feel confident with. But ultimately I felt confident with this when I was on my own. And when I got back there with the crew, I started to feel that point of being unconfident based off of the read I was getting off of everyone. So I had to kind of stand back to push them out of it, listen to my own instincts again, and to be able to be in touch with those instincts whilst in front of everyone and to make that right decision and the calculated decision. And I was able to make the call, judge it right, pull it off, jump it. My wheels did explode, but I managed to ride out of it. But I think Robbie, by pulling it off, it kind of proved to me that I'm kind of onto something there.
Yeah, you know what's interesting to me, hearing you talk about it, it's a fear almost of consequences in a team situation where it's not just yourself, it's something bigger than yourself, it's the team, it's the family, it's your sponsors, it's everybody. And I was actually thinking, you know, in many ways I should perhaps be interviewing Amy, your wife.
For sure.
She's the most fear because she very loyally waits for you on the landing ramp each time. So perhaps next time we'll have her on the show as well. Now we're going to come back to some of your success strategies, the whole thing of getting in the zone, flicking the fear switch on and off. So stay tuned for more from Robbie. Sure. But, what you've just touched on there actually dovetails a lot with what Simon Wagstaff was saying. So Ash, if we can go to Simon's first segment, because he also talks about the differences of fear, particularly when there's other people involved and other consequences. So let's now go to Simon, ex-commando, special forces, bomb disposal expert and parachutist.
I was sitting in the door, in fact, the first time, you know, with 2,000 feet up, looking down, terrified, noise, wind, smells, all kinds of crazy things going on, and then you get this bang on your back and out you go and you start counting, and then there's this almighty jerk as you're pulled upright and you look up, and then suddenly it's complete silence, complete peace. You look down, you look up first, to be honest, because you want to make sure you're not about to die. So you look up and make sure the thing's open properly. Then you start to get your bearings, and it was just such a rush, such an amazing rush of emotions, all in the space of a few minutes, that there's no other way to say it. I was immediately hooked on that kind of power, on freefall parachuting.
So it was a rush, and it was an addictive thing immediately, yeah?
For me, it was. A lot of people, they do it once, it terrifies them so much. They say, okay, I've done it, that's it, I'm done. For others, it has the opposite effect, and it did for me. So you then enter a progression system as a student freefall parachutist, and so I followed through that, and I'll tell you the truth, I was dreadful. I every time I jumped out, I was upside down, I was spinning, I was flailing, I was scared. I was still scared, I was still terrified, but I wanted now to conquer that to the point where I could perform to a higher degree. Because in sport parachuting, there are competitions, there are 4 disciplines, or there were then, and I had that in my sights. So out of the 3,000 or 3,500 jumps I did, I always say this, you know, the first 3,000 were the worst.
Yes.
Always keep an element of, I don't want to call it fear anymore, but an element of respect and an element of caution. Much like, I suppose, a downhill skier or a ski jumper, or I don't know, there's all kinds of other sports that are high performance like that. And you know, these emotions, I remember the first time I did a free fall jump, the first time I jumped a square parachute, which operates in a different way. The first time I did a free fall formation with other people. And what happens, your fear changes from being afraid of dying. You've got hold of that fear now. You know how to manage that. You know what to do. You know how to cut away your main, you know how to deploy a reserve parachute, and the odds of dying in a parachute jump reduce with experience. But once you're in competition and now you're in a team, the fear becomes the fear of letting other people down with your performance. And in that respect, I can liken it to an office or a corporate situation where you don't want to let the team down. You know, you've got to do the best you can so that everybody performs to a high standard, and that became the key for me, especially once I reached the higher levels of competition. And in 1989, I was invited to join the Royal Marines parachute team, which was at the time the current world record holder. They were far and away the best parachute team in the country, one of the best in the world, in the discipline of canopy relative work, which is where parachutes, I'm sure you've seen it on TV or somewhere else, where the parachutes link up. So you've jumped out of the aeroplane, you've got over that, you've opened your parachute, you've saved your life once. Now you're going to go and crash your parachute into somebody else's parachute and take on another whole set of enormous risk. And the discipline that I was particularly fond of and adept at, along with the rest of the team, was what we called speed 8. So 8 of you would leap out of the airplane as quickly as possible in a formation as tightly together as you could, open your parachutes, and as quickly as you could, smash them all back into each other, all 8 parachutes, lined up in a nice stack, and then the stopwatch stopped, and off you went. And it was just, again, a super adrenaline rush from the second you got into the plane until the second you landed on the ground. Fantastic.
So the adrenaline rush is the reward that makes the risk worthwhile?
Oh, yeah, no question. The adrenaline, it wasn't like a bang, there's the rush, it's over with. It would go on and on and on. Right. For a period of time after every jump, you'd be shaking. And that was pure adrenaline coursing through your body, I mean.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, so that's some initial thoughts from Simon on his relationship fear, and we're going to go back to Simon in a moment to hear about what it's like to do bomb disposal. Can you imagine? My goodness. And he tells us it's a different type of fear, so stay around for that. All right, we're going to jump along now to the next guest, Janine Shepherd. So Janine, who I said I was at university with, and I remember her as a very, very, very sporty, active young lady, was in training basically as an Olympic hopeful for the Australian snow skiing team, and took a ride out to the Blue Mountains one day on her racing bike, just a lazy, I think, 150-kilometer ride out to the mountains on a Sunday morning, and bang, she got run over by a truck. Basically, every bone in her body smashed. Let's pick up the story with Janine's master reel there, Ash, and she takes it away.
As there was that moment, that seminal moment that changed my life forever when I was run over by a truck on my bike. And to me, that was, it was sort of the beginning of my life and the beginning of my relationship with fear. I think I'd had a pretty normal sort of existence up to then. I had supportive parents. I went to university. It was, I rode my bike to school every day. I did my studies. I had a goal of, being an exercise physiologist and, of course, going to the Olympics. And it was, it's looking back now, it was a little boring, really, wasn't it? But, when I got run over, of course, everything changed. And that was the moment that, I faced living the rest of my life with a disability. And for someone who defined themselves by their body, that was a very challenging thing to live with. So I've had to develop a very intimate relationship with fear since then, because there's been a lot of things that have been very challenging to me, not just on the outside, but on the inside too. The more I guess, sort of intimate aspects of fear and my body and putting myself out there in the world and the way I looked, the way I thought. I didn't look like an athlete anymore. I didn't have that body, that powerful body anymore. So that was a really challenging inner aspect of fear. And then, of course, there was, the other side, which was doing all the things that I did, which probably is one of the things that makes my story a little remarkable.
Yes, your self-identity, I guess, was changed by that, from elite athlete to, well, you were told that you would never walk again. Was that the lowest moment of your life, or were there lower moments of self-doubt and inner conversation? after that?
Oh, it was a downward spiral. There were many, at first, leaving hospital and being told that I'd have to rethink everything I did in my life. That was very challenging. And of course I didn't listen because I'm incredibly stubborn. So getting home, I think it was, sort of peeling back the layers, like first I realized, oh, okay, well, I can't do this anymore. Then I can't do this anymore. And of course, having a body that had no feeling, having to use a catheter, having to learn to walk, having to, it was an incredible gift to be able to regain enough movement to be back up on my feet. But that was a struggle. I mean, learning to walk, I remember, trying to navigate my way around the furniture in my house and falling over and spending probably 4 hours lying in a plaster body cast on the floor, afraid to move because, I thought all the great surgery that my doctors had done would be unraveled. I had to wait until someone came and picked me up and, there was no one home at the time. So really push, yeah.
What's the quality that gets you from there to here?
Just an unwillingness to give up, or a willingness to not give up. I was so incredibly driven. I've always been Janine the Machine. That was my nickname, and that part of me didn't really change. I wanted to find. I think seriously, I think what we all want in life. We don't, we say we want the house and the car and the relationships and all of those things, but what we really want is to know that our lives count, that our lives matter, and that we make a difference, and that it sort of matters that we lived, and we want to experience life, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to experience as much of life as I could. I wanted to squeeze the life out of whatever I had left, and knowing that I had this what I call a death experience where I'd left my body and made the choice to come back, I wanted to know, okay, well, why did I come back? What's this all about? What's the purpose in this? Threw
yourself towards a new fear, because surely in aerobatics, just the sheer physics of flying an airplane upside down, loops and whatever, that's a new kind of fear, different kind of fear, is it?
It's funny things, Stu. I've never found aerobatic flying scary. I mean, I think it's like anything, if you're driving a car and you understand how that works, the process, you're not scared, and once you learn to fly and you understand aerodynamics and the principles of flight, and of course then I became a commercial pilot, I became a flying instructor, and you just become very attached to you become one with that aircraft. And to me, it was sort of the equivalent of being an elite athlete. Flying aerobatics was just an extension of straight and level flying. It was like, okay, what's something I can do now to make me the best pilot that I can possibly be? And that was, okay, well, I'm going to learn to fly an airplane upside down. And that's how that started.
What is your biggest fear in your life at this moment?
Ooh, living in the US.
All right. After all of that, yeah, the crazy times we're living in. So we've heard from a few elite athletes. We've had Robbie talking about his experiences. We've talked about Simon, the former Commando Special Forces, and then Janine. And our next speaker is Chris Shambrook. So Chris has spent many, not years, decades actually, working at the elite level, the Olympic Games with elite athletes. And I'm really intrigued to find out what sense, I guess, Chris has from his very unique perspective. He may be an elite athlete himself, I'm not sure, but he's very modest. That's one thing I do know. He's always underselling himself, but he's risen to the occasion today, risen very early. In fact, it's only about 7 o'clock in the morning now, I guess, for you, Chris, but he was up early rehearsing this morning. So thank you so much for waking up so early, and to Robbie on the other side of the world for staying up so late for us. This is really fantastic. Thank you. So Chris, over to you, sir.
Fascinating area, I think, because, ultimately we're talking about situations that people put themselves in, where, as you've said, there is something here tied up with our identity and how we perceive ourselves and what we're able to say about ourselves. So I think the stakes get raised when there's personal meaning involved. Because there's, you know, I think as Robbie said, there's loads of other things where actually his identity is not based around, you know, needing to sort of, you know, stay strong in the face of some spider or a, you know, a sort of, you know, but actually there's something around, this is something that's important to me. I want to pursue it. I want to know how good I can be. And when our identity is sort of very connected to the relative success of what we're doing, it changes the game. So with the Olympians, you know, they're handing their career over to sort of, you know, a few moments in time to see if they're able to achieve the dream that they've had. And so I think listening to the different perspectives, there's a couple of things that jump out for me that I think are worth tuning people into. One is the concept that I talk about, outcome hijack. So when something's really, really important to us, we can project to the finish line or the relative finish line, and we can get hijacked by that outcome. We can want to know the answer. Are we going to be successful? What are people going to think about me? Will this be everything that I want it to be? But as soon as our mind starts going into the future, it's taking away a lot of what Robbie was talking about as well, in terms of that ability to be totally present and connect with what you're doing and stay truthful to the process of preparation that you've gone through. So I think for all of us, we recognize outcome hijack. And so typically fear and anxiety, I'll talk to people, say, okay, that just imagine these things are unanswered or unanswerable questions right now, but they're questions that you would love to have the answer to. So the fear comes from actually, I want to know that the answer's there, and I want to know it's going to be okay.
Right.
And then we kind of get disconnected from present to future. So there's some interesting stuff there.
Yeah, is that the biggest fear of the Olympians that you've worked with?
I think there's a lot of it depends on personal motives and what's important to you. So I think Simon's point about fear of letting other people down, there's many people who have got a need to please and a desire to look good through the eyes of others they respect. So if success is sort of very linked up into that then, you know, the outcome moment is where we are able to answer the questions that are important to us when it comes to drive. So if it's about pleasing other people or pushing ourselves or setting new standards, it's about the goal. So I'll always talk to people about, you know, the biggest fear comes from the fear is related to what the goal is that you have sort of set up for yourself, that you've said, this is so important for me to achieve. And there's a lot of our personal drivers in there. So I think for the Olympians, it does depend upon what it means to them personally, what questions they're actually trying to answer. But, you know, it absolutely peaks, as Robbie said, sort of getting closer to the jump. There's a shift because you've got that proximity to the answers. So you have to manage that shift again of emotion now that, you know, it's just like Christmas Eve, as we were talking about before we came up, you know, you're about to find out. But you've got to stay in the moment.
I think on that thing, there is also a point of no return. And I know Robbie would experience this, which is, you know, let's say you're about to go and do that ramp jump. At some point, there is a point of no return. You are fully committed to having to go over that ramp in whatever circumstances, because you cannot stop at that point. And Robbie, perhaps we'll come back and talk about that a little bit later, about that point of no return, because I think in business we have the same thing too, right? We're committed to a certain technology, for example. Mm-hmm. We sign up for something and it may or not, you know, by the time it's delivered, it still may or may not be the best technology or the best solution for our problems. Yeah. Any other observations, Chris?
Yeah, well, so I think that point of no return is a really interesting one, because again, for the Olympians, you know, we'll do the best job that we can of trying to stop there being those very black and white transition points. You know, so the start line of Olympic final is a point of no return. But if we build that up to be much bigger than it is, you know, we can again get the outcome hijack. It can become, oh, well, this is it now, rather than doing everything possible about getting in control early and choosing your preparation, choosing your breakfast, choosing everything that you do. Everything is a choice that I'm choosing to go through this process. And then I'm going to choose how I get to the start line. I'm going to choose how I move off the start line. I'm going to choose to get into my race plan. So again, where sometimes we make it harder for ourselves by having these very black and white transition points Whereas if we can keep everything as an entire process, Robbie again talked brilliantly. So there's a beautiful sort of clear theory about the difference between threat and challenge states. A challenge state being one in which you've done everything possible to feel fully in control. Sort of the preparation Robbie talked about, fully confident that you've got what it takes to do what needs to be done, but also a mindset of curiosity. I'm really interested to find out how well I do this. I can't wait to see how well the preparation is used. So that there's a freedom in that curiosity. So physiologically, heart rate goes up, but the cardiovascular system, everything opens up and the blood flow is delivered really much more efficiently to the brain and the body. Threat state, I feel out of control. I'm focused on all the things that I'd like to have more control over. The confidence or the faith in yourself isn't as high, and I'm focused on a very black and white, success or failure, do or die, goal. I must do this. I have to do this. This is it. If I don't do this, this is failure. The heart rate goes up. So blood pressure is going to be pushed around, but the cardiovascular system restricts in the threat state. So now we've got inefficiency going around. So everything that Robbie was talking about in terms of the breathing, the mindfulness, that is all part of that process of helping the body with the connection between the brain, the central nervous system, and the vagal nerve, move from the fight-flight state into the rest and digest, where we're actually feeling in a much better place to go. So it's really interesting when you look at the control, confidence, and then is it curiosity or is it a demand? And if I'm out of control, lacking confidence and facing a demand that my identity hangs on, that's not going to be a place to be stepping in to get a peak performance. But where I'm in control, feeling confident and curious to find out what the devoted preparation is going to lead me to, and testing myself to see what happens, then you've freed everything up. Now you're playing with freedom rather than trying to stop having fear. And that for me is a massive shift, business-wise, sport-wise, whatever.
Yeah, interesting point. We've talked a lot, and a few people have talked about the fight versus flight mechanism. Now, this is something obviously goes back probably 2 or 2.5 million years in human DNA, which was obviously developed probably in the plains of Africa or something against those very specific threats. Does it appear to you now, Chris, that maybe in the modern day age, where the threat of perhaps a tiger jumping out of the bush or a lion jumping on you, those threats have disappeared and been replaced by others, but we are still, can I say, hamstrung by the same mechanism, which is a hair trigger mechanism, which creates these physiological changes in us, as you say, for fight or flight, which perhaps is causing us to overreact to a lot of things in our modern environment, especially in modern developed countries.
Yeah, we end up reacting to the reaction. And again, the fear that we now have is probably about identity or how we're perceived, or fear of letting others down, as Simon talked about. But so there is a very clear fear, and if we don't work hard to disconnect that fight-flight response with that particular thing that we're pursuing, it becomes much more of a kind of emotional challenge. So the outcome hijack is all about kind of getting so kind of wound up that you're chasing yourself, rather than this is something I'm choosing to do. This is something that I've prepared to do. And the other interesting thing that I talk to people about a lot of the time is that, do you know what? You are totally within your free right to screw up with world-class brilliance. The thing that you're fearing happen of looking a fool, you can make it happen in a heartbeat. But we get so wound up by the need for doing this thing in the way that we mustn't do this. We kind of lose sight that, we can perform in any way that we choose to, depending upon the preparation. So if you want to look like a complete novice, you can go out and mimic one. And as soon as we start talking to people about sort of disconnecting that sort of irrational connection with it has to be this, it must be this, and kind of go, but I could make it that. We stop some of that link between the threat to identity and that fight-flight response as well. So it's trying to make it a much more helpful relationship between the pursuit of the goal and the way in which we go after it.
Yeah, I want to move towards talking about some of those success strategies in a moment, just so that there's some really positive outcome and some very tangible walkaways for people, particularly in a corporate entrepreneurial sense. But as I understand, fear is basically intellectual, physical, social, emotional risk. It's all processed by the same part of the brain and actually comes out feeling the same way. So we are really saddled with a very difficult job of unbundling those things, aren't we?
Yeah.
So it's unhelpful to us, it seems, in our modern lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and that's again why we have to sort of, really look at personally defining for ourselves what success, what reputation do we want with other people or with ourselves? What's, what is it that we're pursuing and why is this important to us? Yeah. And then, as Robbie's talking about, what's the preparation that I can consistently do that gives me the best chance of showing up and using my talent, knowledge, skill, and experience in the most effective way, given the capacity I have at the time? So because a lot of what a sports psych does in the performance sport environment is try to bring logical sequencing of the thought and emotional control to sit alongside the very obvious kind of build-up that was taking place physically and technically. So yeah, what we are just trying to make sure that a lot of what we know can be natural responses that go unchecked. Well, actually, we've got more control over that. We can choose our thoughts, we can choose our emotions, we can connect memories with with current situation. We can use music, we can use breathing, we can use any number of sort of interventions to manage that state. So we talk about, how do I want to feel, rather than kind of going, I wonder how I'm going to feel. Because as soon as we start wondering what it's going to be like in that unhelpful way, we start getting into that outcome hijack and the threat stuff. And, the physiological messages are sort of threat. So the brain kind of goes, right, we're screwed. What are we going to do? And then you get in this doom loop. Yeah.
So it comes back to a lot of, say, what Robbie was saying earlier about the visualization, right? I'm seeing myself in that successful situation. I'm seeing
as well as the meticulous rehearsal. So one, there is the kind of looking at projecting and thinking about executing the skill and getting the successful outcome. But most of the visualization research will show you it's much more about rehearsing the process of performing, rather than just sort of seeing yourself sort of going like this, being a legend at the end of it without actually having done the hard yards.
Right.
Robbie, it's the whole thing. It's the pre-creation of the performance to enjoy, so that it feels familiar when you step into the start line.
Right.
And that's the key thing.
Great. Let's throw to Robbie. Just get your reaction on that. Let's just take the canyon jump, for example, a world record jump, or your Arc de Triomphe jump. How many times do you practice that away from the actual site or away from the event before it actually, the cameras roll and you do it in front of the huge public?
Yeah, great to hear you talk too, Chris. It's awesome to hear as professional break it down like that. And obviously I've worked with sports psychologists a lot, so I have dealt with similar, but it's awesome to hear you speak and reflect on that. So in terms of practicing these things, I always practice it. And what Chris was mentioning before there about picturing it, not picturing yourself cheering at the end. I mean, I actually laugh then because it's so true. It's practicing and mentally picturing all those fine steps, as well as the gear changes, the sound, the revolutions of the engine, the ramp, and picturing the ramps. And I mean, I break it down into every little sequence, so when you're picturing it, you're actually mindful, and you're picturing it like so clearly that you're mindful of like the flowers on the side of the track. You can see all these little things. So when I did the jump in Las Vegas, we set up the structure in a different location here north of LA, and I practiced it over about I think it was set up for 3 weeks. So over the 3 weeks, I practiced it until I got to the full height. And at the full height, I did the jump about 10 or 15 times. And I actually practiced and rehearsed in the gear that I'd wear on the night, because I was wanting to wear new gear, which is always a risk. It's a little bit tighter and restrictive than normal. But I did have a full dress rehearsal, and then we broke the ramp down, and it was 2 weeks that I had to wait, and then went back in Las Vegas and did it that one more time. And so that was the hard part for me, is like practicing it and doing it in steps and building up is quite easy in comparison to then going away and having to take all those references and things that you've done, and then having to hit the nail on the head again, one more shot in under pressure, that's a whole nother ball game that I think a lot of people can struggle with. And I know it was a huge thing for me, but that's where the mental preparation and the practice prior helped me picture things, and we're able to set up the motorcycle with the correct gearing. So when I only had to get into a certain gear and hold the revs at a certain point, and I'd get to the right speeds. And then in the Corinth Canal in Greece, we actually set up a replica jump on the other side of town, because the problem I had in Greece is I couldn't run past the ramp with the speed I'd need to make sure I could get to the right speed and run past the ramp and see the radar and say, okay, your speed's a little off, you need to be 5 miles an hour quicker, or whatever it is. And that's what I normally do with the jumps. I'll obviously jump them with my own judgment and my own process of how I go about figuring out how to do the jump. And then ultimately, once I figure the jump out and do it at a certain distance, as we step it out, it's a bit of a calculation. We're monitoring my speeds. We're like, all right, at this speed, you're landing here. And then I'll purposely go faster and land considerable amount past my target zone. And I know, okay, I landed 50 feet past my target point. I mark where I'm taking off. It's a little prehistoric, my technique, because I don't have a radar on the bike, but essentially this is the game that I'm playing in. But to make it quickly, there is practice scenarios. There is sets that a way that I go about practicing it. And in Greece, we had the replica on the other side of town. And ultimately, what I got to the point of having to do the final jump, I knew that I couldn't get the speed that I needed to actually clear the ramp totally to the other side. So I had to navigate myself over a small fence. There was a few obstacles in my path, and then and one of the main things that made me not jump on the day that I was meant to jump is the hotel next door emptied their pool, just bad timing, and it flooded my run up. So I knew I was already struggling to get the speed. Once the run up got flooded, it was like the deal was over. So it was an easy thing, but it was funny because my gut had been telling me that something wasn't right. And then at the final hours, I was too stubborn to give in. I didn't want to let everyone down. And then something out of my control made it easy for me, which was great. But the practice things, I think for me have been key. And I'm sure Chris, you could attest to this. And especially we see with athletes in the Olympics, they're going out and they're actually running or they're doing their performance to the conditions as much as possible. And essentially that's what I try to do. And it's, at the end of the day, it's what makes it, it makes it a lot safer. But in saying that, I have gone into situations that are fearful for me, getting in front of loud audiences and speaking, doing coaching, coaching or doing a public speak on just my life or whatever. I find that there's been times where I get really nervous because I'm trying to remember something that I've pre set out or thought about. And when I find when I'm doing speeches, if I'm just shooting from the hip and being passionate and truthful, it happens a lot easier. And so the way I look at that with the motorcycle, I guess they're two different scenarios. But for me, practicing on the bike, it gives me those keys to be able to focus on, to picture, and essentially even down to the color of the ramp. When I jumped in Las Vegas in the practice, the ramp was always white, and on the night they painted it blue. And that was a huge red flag for me. It really threw me off a lot just because of the way I'd pictured it. It wasn't like that. So there's obviously a psychology that obviously I don't understand. I understand it practically, but as far as the theory books go, I don't. But I know when it comes down to doing something, and when I need something out of myself, I'm able to go to these situations where you're quiet in the mind, focus, stay in the moment. Don't get ahead of myself. It's like always focusing one step at a time. I have my keys, and those things are, and even like I find when I do my speeches now, I just have those points that I want to hit. And then as you go along, you hit your keys, you hit your points. It makes it a lot easier. So this all turns around to talk about the preparation you mentioned, Stu, and preparation's key. I think no matter what you do for success.
Yep. Okay, great. Thanks. And that dovetails nicely with what we want to talk about now is, you talk about a different kind of fear there, a different sort of gut feel and how that, your reactions to that. Let's have a look at some thoughts from Simon. Let's go to Simon Wagstaff now, talking about differences in fear. So, Simon, you're saying there's a difference in fear in being a bomb disposal expert and being a parachutist. Could you explain that difference? How is it different?
Yeah, I think I can. As a parachutist, whether you're in a team or as an individual, the biggest risk is that you're going to die. I think we can all accept that. Okay, you don't want to let the team down, you don't want to look a fool, all of those things, sure. But you don't want to die. But if you do mess up in that regard and you die, okay, now you're dead. It's over, right? You're not worried about it. You're just dead, and life goes on. Now,
no, it doesn't. You're dead.
Life goes on else.
Good point.
In bomb disposal, there are two main factors. One, okay, I'm dead. I'm the red mist on the wall, but who else is? Are 10 of my colleagues dead? Are 50 innocent civilians dead? Did a building collapse and kill everybody inside it? So it's fear, but it's also acceptance of responsibility for all those lives that you're trying to protect. So that's the difference. Now you're afraid of hurting somebody else as well. Does that do it?
All right. Yeah, so, that's just fascinating. It sets us up for really discussing now, I think, trying to tie some of these threads together in terms of what are some of the success strategies. How can we actually confront these things? And we've heard of obviously very extreme examples. And the thing here is to understand that fear is fear, but are there ways that we can either banish it, manage it, control it, frame it, reframe it? So let's now go to Simon's video on success strategies. And then Chris, I'd like to throw to you and then just get some of your feedback on that. And yeah, just maybe share with us some of the success strategies that you've used successfully with Olympians as well. How do we actually master this whole thing called fear and channel it to something really positive? Ash? So how do we apply what we can learn from that towards fear management at work? What are the parallels? What are the analogies here?
Well, I think you have to say, well, what is it you're afraid of when you go into, let's say, a new office, or if you're given a new task, or it could be just, routine. What is it you're afraid of? Are you afraid of getting fired? Are you afraid of making yourself look stupid? Are you afraid of letting the team down? So you've got to really analyse what is it you're afraid of, I think. So when you're looking at something and saying, oh, I'm not sure if I should do that or not, well, why not? Ask yourself, why not? Why shouldn't I do it? What am I afraid of? And I think once you analyse that,
yeah.
Let me just go back. It's just come back to me. The question you asked earlier. At the #1 parachute training school in UK, there's a great big badge on in fact, it's the squadron motto, and it says, knowledge dispels fear.
Nice.
That's the motto of the #1 parachute training school in UK. And that's something that has never left me.
Great.
Knowledge dispels fear. So the more you know, the less you're afraid. So I think it begins with, what are you afraid of? So in parachuting, well, I'm afraid my parachute won't open and I'll die. Right, well, let's teach you how to manage that. So if you go into the office and now, right, I want you to make this presentation on the budget for next year, Oh, what if I mess it up? I'm afraid of messing it up. Okay, well, how do you manage that risk? Go and talk to somebody who's done it before. Get some advice, read some books, go on the internet. Whatever it is, knowledge dispels fear. If you've got a great grasp of the subject, then you've got nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, great point. And, you know, Janine made the same point earlier about the stunt flying, aerobatic flying. She says, as long as you understand the physics and the mechanics of the aeroplane, what's there to fear? It's just like driving a car, yeah? So let's hear a bit more from Janine now in terms of her success strategies, how we can harness this, channel it, and bring our A game.
Firstly, yes, fear can be great. Fear can actually stimulate us towards action. But secondly, you know, if it's an irrational fear and it's not serving us, we can definitely learn to manage that fear by simple things, cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, telling ourselves, well, what am I really afraid of? You know, and of course, there's a great exercise we can do, you know, when we look at our fears, we can say, okay, you know, what's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario? What's the most probable scenario? And what's one action I can take? So there are really tangible tools, which I teach, you know, because I teach resilience, you know, so I teach people these tools, you know, and of course, I'm going to throw another thing in here, you know, if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, you know, I read a lot of, I read Pema Chodron, for example. I love her teachings. She says fear takes us closer to the truth. So in that sense, if you look at fear in that spiritual perspective and you ask yourself, well, what am I really afraid of? People don't go deep. They don't ask those questions. But when you do ask those questions, you know, you are closer to the truth. And the truth is that there is nothing, you know, of essence, of real value that we're going to lose. I sort of love, you know, when I feel fear, it's, to me, I'm like, well, isn't that interesting? You know, what can I learn from that? And I know that, you know, what I teach people too is that, you know, our fears are often the things that we turn from. But when we turn directly towards what I call the hill, the challenges, the difficulties in life, you know, we learn that there really wasn't anything to fear. And I think the only way to learn that is through experience. The only way to learn that is going in there and trying and facing your fears and seeing what happens. And in the end, you go, wow, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And you know what? The magic happens on the other side of the hill.
Good. Could you perhaps share with us some of the success strategies that we can adopt? Are there ways to, as you mentioned before, adrenaline, cortisol, the bad guys, the stress chemicals? If we're really, you know, we might be making a presentation, we might be nervous about a business outcome, there might be something seriously stressing us and therefore affecting our performance. Do you have some go-to kind of de-stressors that you can share with us? How do we bring that down?
Well, you know what? If we're in that fight and flight, you know, one of the first things I would say is for people to learn deliberate breathing, you know, to really learn how to breathe properly. You know, not breathing from the chest, but really deep breathing. You know, we know that it calms the, you know, the nervous system. So even just taking 5 breaths, you know, breathing in for 5, breathing out for 5, doing some really deliberate breathing sort of brings the prefrontal cortex back online, stops that whole fight and flight, you know, works for me. I know it. I mean, science says it works for everybody or most people. And I would say, you know, again, that exercise I talked about, which is, you know, say you're going on stage, you're giving a presentation. That's what I do. I'm a public speaker. And, you know, you're sort of freaking out. Oh, my gosh, I'm going to flop. No one's going to like this. It's going to, you know, okay, well, let's get a grip on this. You know, you do your breathing and you say, okay, well, what's the worst case scenario? You know, oh, my God, I'm going to forget my words. This is going to be a flop. You know, well, what's the best case scenario? It's going to be fantastic, standing ovation. You know, what's the most probable? Well, a bit of both. Right? It's going to be a bit of both. You know, I might stumble, but I'll go on. It's not going to kill me. And what's one thing I can do, you know, to move me closer and to get over this hill? Well, I can take some breaths before I go on stage. You know, I can pause and have a glass of water on the lectern. You know, I can, I can have a keyword that I might go to. So there are strategies, and probably a really powerful one that I love, which is when people are afraid of, have a challenge or something they're afraid of. I always say WTGIT.
Okay, so Chris, would you like to react to those two perspectives?
Yeah, well, there's a few things to relate to. So in the film The Bridge of Spies, Tom Hanks's character is the legal representative for Mark Rylance's character. He's sort of accused of spying, and a couple of times in the film, Tom Hanks says to Mark Rylance's character, "Do you ever worry?" And Mark Rylance just said, "Would it make any difference? Would it help if I did?" And there's a lot of what we're hearing there is just some of those really simple ways of getting to the truth there of, what if we're going to worry, what functional benefit do we want to get from it? Because if I love healthy paranoia as a concept. So if I'm going to be paranoid about stuff, I'm going to make sure it answers some questions that drive action for me now. Because otherwise I'm just playing with sort of, trying to mind read and sort of, predict the future, which isn't helping me feel more in control. So there's both things we're hearing there, very much about Mark Twain's quote, "I've experienced many terrible things in my life, most of which have never happened." So there's a lot of that stuff which we start to think about, which is, again, outcome hijack, taking us to the future, projecting rather than kind of going, actually, if I go through a process of self-acceptance here and kind of go, who better than me to give this a go? What track record and experience have I got that gives me the right to find out how well I can do this today? And what do I actually personally want to learn from the situation I'm about to go in? As soon as we get that self-acceptance that this is important to me and the drivers that I've got are valuable, so I won't start judging that, we can have much more of a compassionate outlook. And there's brilliant research around self-compassion. And I think self-compassion is one of the really big ones here. That if we seek to be kind to ourselves rather than judge, which is a lot of the CBT stuff that Janine's talking about. If we seek to accept that actually most people respond like this, rather than I bet I'm the only person who's responding like no one else would ever be like this. So if we go self-kindness, sort of, common humanity, and then the kind of the breathing stuff again, we're really back into, familiarity breeds control, not contempt, when it comes to doing stuff that's important to us. I'm really familiar with how I feel, why this is important to me. I accept it. This is really important. And I think both of those examples just give us the real clarity over choosing to engage with something that's important to us on our terms rather than have the fear take over. So the song at the beginning was all sorts of uses of the acronym FEAR, but the two that people typically do are forget everything and run,
right,
or face everything and rise. And what we're doing here is the kind of, well, actually, I'm choosing to do this. And I think Robbie's points about actually knowing when to step back, that now is not the right time. That question of, am I absolutely sure I'm ready to get my answer now? And if there is some doubt in there as an expert, you can kind of go, right, it's my duty to myself and everyone around me to use my expertise to kind of go, actually, there's not sufficient evidence in the answer here that I am ready to find out what this version of me is going to be like. I need some extra reassurance. So there's a lot there in terms of the rational thinking that, choosing to engage on your terms. And I did notice someone popped a question about fear of success, I think, as well. And I think a lot of this is the same. It's just a different driver. But also I was talking with Catherine Granger a couple of weeks ago on a podcast I do about her Olympic career, 5 Olympic Games, 4 silver medals, 1 gold medal. And we started having a conversation about fear of not winning. So an ongoing track record of winning, but the big fear of not winning when you've got the next chance to do it, which is a more important one. So there's some really interesting stuff about, what's the event that's coming up and how is it engendering fear in me. because it's
Right.
not always fear of failure. It's about fear of response to what might happen next. But some great stuff in there. I hope that gives you some sort of bit of clarity around the acceptance and sort of clarity of thinking.
Yeah. Great, thanks. So we've got about 12 or 13 minutes left. I'm happy to go all day. This is fantastic, really stimulating, and I hope you guys are enjoying it. Thanks for the questions. They've come in thick and fast.